props. I own Stilt Beast Studios, where we make costumes and things for haunted attractions all over the world. I'm also the director of Dark Hour Haunted House in Plano, Texas, and I have been haunting in some form or another for 33 years. So, yeah, that's me. That's what I do.
So we're going to be talking about costuming for haunted attractions today.
And this is part of the COVID YouTube series event.
Yeah,
an event.
It's an event.
So yeah, this should be fun. We gathered questions from several groups on the interwebs, and she'll be asking me those questions. That's Stacy, by the way.
Hi, I'm the seamstress here at Stilt Beast.
She is often the voice or the giggle just off camera. So there you go. And I'm going to work on this werewolf foot while we do that.
Okie doke. So we're going to start with character design. What are some important elements to consider when beginning to create a haunt character?
So probably the number one thing that you have to consider that isn't as big of a deal for some other things is comfort. A haunted house actor is going to have to be in that for 6-7 hours, and they have to move in it, and they're going to have to be able to go to the bathroom. So, you know, leotard monster costumes look great, but you can't pee. So you have to think about those kind of things. This person or this creature has to pee at some point. They're going to have to eat at some point. They have to stay hydrated. Those factors are, of course, important. And then you get into things like, what's the nature of the character? There is kind of an unwritten law that a character that is physically attacking is going to have a tight form and a tight structure. Like if you look at a panther, you know, their body is very sleek. So that's something. But if a character is going to attack your soul or your mind, then they're going to be a little more Daphneus. They're going to have flowing robes like the Grim Reaper, like the Dementors from Harry Potter. So what are you trying to threaten the guest with that character? And then apply those design concepts. There are some very successful characters that do both, but if you look at Luke Skywalker, he wasn't a great Force user in Jedi, and he had that tight black outfit because he was a physical presence with his lightsaber. He used the Force some, but not as much as the Emperor, who was no physical presence and all Force and only wore robes. And then right in the middle, you had a very intimidating presence physically and a very Force-savvy presence with Darth Vader. He had the hard plastic sleek armor and this great flowy cape. So he combined the two and was very successful that way. I would not recommend combining the two very often because you shouldn't have 20 Darth Vaders in your movie. That is your haunted house. Other factors, how are they going to be moving? Are they going to snag on doorways? Does one textural piece that you have on there act like Velcro and will snag the curtains, or eventually just be wadded up with hair and gross stuff, and it'll hurt the look over time? Those are all things to consider. But also silhouette. Silhouette is huge for what we're doing. This year, I think even more so, silhouette is going to be even more at the forefront of our costume design, because the nature of staying 6 feet away, you're going to see more of that character. They're going to be bigger. So the silhouette kind of has to be stronger. It's no longer that pop in, pop out 2 feet from your face. Little more spectacle has to happen this year, and that means improve and make extreme your silhouette of your costumes.
Since we're talking about this year and it's a little bit unique, one of the questions we got was how to accommodate COVID safety measures with masks without muffling your actors too much.
You're just going to muffle your actors, and you have to then prepare for that. Now, you could microphone all of your actors, but you're going to have to get them a microphone that will survive being underwater conditions, which there are some out there. Or if their mask is a harder mask, you can actually put a guitar amp pickup mic on it. So miking your actors is a good way to go. Or putting whatever you wanted them to say in the soundtrack, and then they just kind of pantomime along to it. But if their mouth is covered, no one can see their mouth moving, so I would do a triggerable sound. There's just not a safe way to have them be straight mouth, no covering, and spewing out and breathing in haunted house conditions. You have to cover their mouth with a mask and their nose so that you eliminate transfer both ways. And that's gonna muffle the sound. So you have to amplify other things. You have to amplify their action of what they're doing. You have to change the audio in the room a little bit. That's going to be one of the challenges this year.
Where do you find or come across costume patterns?
All over the place. I mean, I consistently look. A great place to look is Pinterest, and I know that there's going to be some hardcore costumers watching this, and they're going to cringe like crazy. But one of the things that I love for simplicity is if you can hop on Pinterest or some of the just art file sites. I think DeviantArt has some, and put in robe pattern, put in hood pattern, put in whatever, and it's just the basic shapes laid out on a piece of fabric. Sometimes there's measurements, sometimes they're not. I've just adapted to work well with those. As long as I know the basic shape, I can get it put together. But also, look at some of your big designers. They want interesting cuts, and a lot of runway stuff isn't good for normal wear. It's not meant to be, but it's extreme, so maybe it's good for haunted house, maybe it's good for show conditions. McQueen is huge. There's a couple designers that I follow pretty heavy in order to see what they're doing. How is something cut? How is it different? And Pinterest is really great for that kind of stuff too. Just look, that's where I get a lot of patterns. Is I'll look for the thing, I'll find a thing that I like, and then I think, how can I modify an existing pattern to do that cut? Or can I find this pattern?
Do you have suggestions for a base costume pattern that can be turned into any kind of character?
I think if you can make a basic haunted house robe, that is not actually a bad starting point. You can modify that pattern to turn it into a tailcoat. You can modify that pattern to turn it into a jumpsuit, in all honesty, with a little bit of cutting. It's a pretty versatile garment. But as far as a base, I can actually add in the video description a good basic pattern that you can modify in a lot of ways. One thing that I think we should look at as attractions is a long coat like a duster can be modified accoutrement-wise to fit in a lot of eras and to fit in with a lot of themes. That white coat obviously can go into a lab or an asylum. Take that same coat and add some chainmail patches to it and some hair strips hanging down, and then you have something a little more medieval-esque. So, or you can add plates and rust them up, and that is going to look a little more future. But it covers about 50% of the actor, and coverage is something that you want to look for with basic patterns.
Do you have some tips on how to maximize efficiency when it comes to the costume character design for larger groups or haunts?
Well, one of the things that we do to be efficient at Dark Hour is we do several shows a year, between 5 and 8 different haunted house shows a year. And I try to have three types of characters on each show. For example, we have a werewolf show, and in that werewolf show, we have English hunters, who are pretty much the African great white hunter guys from Jumanji. We have the werewolves themselves, who are wolfmen and werewolves. And then we have a group called the Zagani, who are kind of a more tribal nomadic people who are allied with the werewolves. And that's kind of related to the movie tie-in of the Romani and werewolves from a lot of the Wolfman movies. But we kind of made our own group just to keep things separate and different. But that allows us to do a lot of different looks, and you can overheat an actor on Friday in a werewolf costume, and then Saturday they get to be a Zagani, and then, you know, so you can switch around that way. But also having 3 groups, your different sizes of actor can kind of fit into those. A portly guy like me is fine as an English hunter, that's completely believable. I'm a bit of a teddy bear if I'm a regular werewolf, because I'm just more teddy bear shaped. So, you know, you just have to think about body type, and when you are casting your show, think about all your body types, and make sure that you have characters that can easily fit those people. And then it's getting enough things together where that you can pull and, you know, create. If the first English hunter that they see is decked out head to toe in that khaki safari gear with a nice leather bandolier and the pith helmet, then the next one can be a little bit less, but the guest's brain fills in the details, and the next one can be a little bit less. So the last one can be in a khaki shirt and khaki pants, you know, and have like a different style hat on, but if he still is going to read because you did the work up front of introducing the characters. If each one of those were different characters, you would have to do that work all over again. They would all have to be pristine in order to read, in order for the guests to learn about them. But you taught about them in the first room that they went to, and then you're just reinforcing it as they go through, so you can do a little bit less. So that's another way to maximize your efforts, energy, and money.
So tying into that one, how do you accommodate fitting different size actors using the same costume?
Lacing is huge. One of the things that I like to do is we'll run eyelet tape in the back of a costume on 2 sides, and then it's very simple, but you can run on the inside or the outside. In a haunted house setting, you don't normally see the character's back very often because it's just not aggressive to have your back to someone. So in a haunted house setting, you normally will only see the front. And then, in all honesty, I also think that the big lacing in the back can add some texture and just difference. But yeah, just straight down both sides of the back, and then you can pull that tight on the torso. Now, it's harder to change things like sleeves, but I highly recommend just having different size costumes. Have a stable of costumes for your smaller actors, have a stable of costumes for your larger actors. I think that's kind of the way to go, is you're just going to have a variety, because people come in such a variety. Within that size range, you can have cheats, and maybe you only need, you know, 1 top, and then you need 3 different skirts for different sizes.
You draw strings and things like that.
Yeah, drawstrings, what you normally do to make something. I'm not big on elastic on haunt costumes because it'll wear out over time. And the actors will sweat so much that it actually hurts the latex in the elastic, and that is why haunt costumes wear out more. People sweat more in them.
How do you deal with a costume that may need to go from hot to cold weather, like for an outside haunt that will range from warm in October or in the beginning of October to freezing at the end?
You have to look at in terms of that character and what would that character do in that situation. Maybe you have goblins that are just like tatters, you know, but they have a green bodysuit on. If you really just want to keep that look, then you have them wear thermals underneath. But if you are willing to kind of extend your world a little bit, I think that goblin would put on a cloak. You know, what would that character do to solve this problem? And approach every situation that way, and then you're solving the problem in character. And I think that actually makes a little bit more of a believable world, because, you know, if you think about it and you have cloaks and character appropriate warm weather, cold weather gear for your cast, you know, then you're prepared. And I think the guests see that. There's a haunted house in Pennsylvania called Terror Behind the Walls, and they have, for every character, they have that character's coats, they have that character's, you know, short sleeve, you know, light duty shirts. They have different levels for their different nights, because they'll be in the 70s in the beginning of their season, and they might be in the teens at the end of their season.
To the other end, how are there some design choices you can make to not overheat your actors?
This is harder to do, but using natural fabrics are going to breathe a lot more and a lot easier. A lot of the synthetic fabrics, it's like a plastic sheet, and it's not going to breathe. It's going to cling to you a little bit when you're wet and sweaty, and that's not going to allow heat to leave your body. I prefer, like my design style, I prefer things a little more flowy. So you can also mount fans on the floor and let them stand over a fan, and that kind of almost inflates them a little bit in between shows, in between groups. But just being able to move your costume and get air into it is huge. I know that there are some characters, we had fans backstage above, and they said, that fan is awesome because I can stand under it and I can let the air go in this eye hole. And it's like, oh, okay, great. I'm glad that helps you. But you know, they know. And masks especially, but also costuming, ventilate the heck out of it. Any chance that you have to cut a hole for air or moisture to escape, do it. Now you have to worry a little bit about moisture escaping this year because of COVID happening, and probably in years to come. So make sure that your ventilation, I would rather the actor draw air in from behind them. Behind the ear is a wonderful place to cut holes because your guests will never see it in a mask, and your mouth is very good at drawing that air in, and it helps cool them down. But ventilation. In my costumes, quite a bit, I might sew mesh into the armpits because, you know, I'm not going to walk around with my hands like this, but that's going to give you breathability, and airflow is key.
Any tips for costuming for people with sensitive skin or latex allergies?
That has to be a case-by-case basis. I don't actually like using latex in distressing because of allergies. Just you're going to limit the amount of people who can wear that costume. So I tend to use silicone or something else for distressing if I need that gunky look, and it kind of has to be case-by-case basis. I know some people who are allergic to cotton, and they can't have cotton touch their skin. So it's not like there's a magical way to do it right. You just have to listen to people and don't deny anyone's allergy, but also be aware that there might be some folks you just can't use. They're like, I'm allergic to cotton, I'm allergic to latex, I'm allergic to fog. Well, I hope you enjoy the show. You know, you at some point you just can't use them. Their list of possible infirmities is too long to accommodate, simply because there's a range that we can accommodate, and you know, you try to be as accommodating as you can.
Any tips for designing for actor movement in costumes?
So there's two things on actor movement. There is actor movement of, I'm looking at that character and it's moving. And then there is, this actor / character has to move through their environment. So if you're testing a costume in your shop with all these great horns and spiky bits on it, and the actor, you know, the costume looks awesome, the actor's moving awesome, they get on set and then, you know, they're caught in every bit of camo net, they're stuck on the curtain, and they hate their life. I had a very excellent actor break down in tears one night because I turned her into a bush, and the concept of the costume was that she was, you know, ghillie suit-esque, plant monster mask, and then the arms had arm extensions that had this cage foliage, and when you just folded your arms, you were a bush. I mean, it all like folded in front of you and stuff. And then when you opened them up, that opened and the monster was revealed. But you can't go through a curtain in that, and that was a very mobile actor, which is why we put them in that spot, because we thought, man, they're going to kill it in this. Well, and they just broke down into tears because I can't move. I get caught on everything. I have to stay in this one area. And you know, so that's a big learning experience where, okay, because it looked great in my living room after I made it, but it did not work functionally except for with an actor who's not very mobile. So you have to consider those things. I don't like to take both of the actors' hands away. I do a lot of hand extensions and arm extensions, and if you put one on each hand, then they have to get out of costume to get a drink of water. They have to get out of costume to open a door. You know, there's the amount of things they have to get out of costume before it goes way up, and I want them to stay in costume. That's another piece. But silhouette is really tied into movement, because if you have a big silhouette and you move a little bit, you've doubled that movement. That's why animals, when they want to be scarier, they puff up and they get bigger. So adding to their silhouette, but not in such a way that will wreck them using their hands, is a great way to increase actor movement.
Moving into construction, are there some tried and true materials like scrunchy, burlap, denim that should be automatically used when creating costumes for specific kinds of characters?
I'm going to say no. That's my easy answer. The harder part of that answer is, if you do the tried and true every time, then you're not going to teach the audience anything new. You're not going to show them anything new. So be very careful of scarecrows are always burlap. I don't, you know, normally scarecrows are burlap, yes. Normally werewolves wear flannel. I don't know why, a lot of lumberjack werewolves running around. But I don't think that you have to follow those things. You know, I think a scarecrow in a really distressed and tattered, like, three-piece suit is a piece of story. A scarecrow in a tuxedo. Why did the farmer's tuxedo end up on a scarecrow? Does your backstory involve his marriage going bad or something? So the ultimate use for his tuxedo was to throw it out in a field. Oh, that thing's useless. I'll get some use out of it. Think about your story, and that's going to help drive your character choice. That's going to help drive your fabric selection. Try and work within that realm, and then you might make some new and interesting choices.
Are there specific factors to consider, like embellishment, oversize, color, texture, etc., in order for costumes to really stand out in the haunt compared to regular clothing?
Yes. Most people, when they're doing haunt costuming, and I hate to say this, it sounds like I'm saying that what they're doing is bad. It's not bad. It's status quo, and it seems like the logical thing to do, is they start with a drab, boring fabric, and then they dull it down with distressing, age it, dirty it up, and then put it in low light conditions. And it didn't have a chance. You know, it didn't have a chance of standing out. So what I normally do is I start with a fabric that's pretty obnoxious, and then I bring it down to the level that I want, with consideration that the room it's in, how it's going to be viewed, is going to bring it down even further. You can spotlight the actor's head and the actor's hands by putting a lighter color collar on them, a yoke, you know, because then, you know, as that dark thing moves, but there is this band, it's like having a spotlight on. The same is true with the hands. I want simple, but fingertips. Often I will take fingertips of gloves and I will hit them with white, so that when they reach for a guest, that white seems closer than even the actor's hand is, because that white pushes forward. Don't start with boring fabrics, is probably the tip. I use a fabric called Scrunchy quite a bit, which actually has a little bit of sparkle to it. It catches light very well in a velvet-like way. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
In a velvet-like way. This is what I use. And I keep it in a lot of colors. It's a very stout fabric. It's very strong. But this, then, I tone down as is appropriate. But I never want to tone it down so much that that character gets lost in low light conditions, because we tend to work in low light conditions.
Any tips for saving money on costume creation?
Mostly I would say make it yourself. This might seem counterintuitive. The intuitive way would be to have a design, but be able to flow your design and change your design based upon things you find and what you have access to. I say have a design and stick to your design as best as possible, because that is going to, if you do that 20 times in a row, then all those choices that you've made are going to teach you new things, and then by the time your 21st costume comes around, you'll have easy, cost-effective decisions because of all those choices you've made. In all honesty, if you take the path of least resistance financially every time you're making a costume, you don't necessarily have a lot of control over how that costume is going to look. So by going the other route, and I have this design and this is how I want it to look, and I'm going to work my butt off and find what I can find to make it look like this, then you are going to learn more than someone taking that path of least resistance.
How do you determine the flame resistance for fabrics short of doing a test yourself?
You test it yourself. And you also have to check, because we use a lot of flame resistors. It's a barrier spray that you spray on sets and things. And sometimes you can spray it on costumes. But you have to make sure that the flame retardant you are using on your sets is also available to use on costumes, because it could be toxic. And that's going to, kind of flake off, and then the actors are going to breathe that in. You have to be careful with that. But test it yourself. And you can use costumes that are flammable, but make sure you use them in a place where there's no possible ignition source. Maybe don't give them to an actor who smokes.
Where do you purchase your fur?
Okay. I go through a lot of fur. I use lots of rolls and rolls of fur. There is a company called Monterey Mills, and they have a very old school industrial companies. Boy, they suck at web design. So their website's a little bit hard to navigate. But on Monterey Mills, on their website, there's a craft section, and then there's fur, and then there's in-stock fur, and then you can find it on there if you dig around. But Monterey Mills is where I buy most of my furs from. I might occasionally need a specialty fur in a color or something that they don't have, but the bulk of my fur I get from Monterey Mills.
Where do you buy fabric for your costumes?
So never go to Joann's without a coupon. And so if you're going to Joann's, never go there without a coupon. And also, print your coupon out before you go there. The Joann's near me has some kind of a Wi-Fi jamming device that I can never pull up a coupon while I'm in the store for some reason. So it ends up where, and then I just pay it. So you have it now, I just print it out ahead of time, so I've got the coupon with me. But I don't often buy from Joann's. If I need something right now, that means I have failed to plan. So normally I will buy online, but also in almost every major city has a fabric trade show that comes. And what I do is I go to the fabric trade show here in Dallas. Some big cities have a fabric district or a fashion district, and go there. Go there and purchase your materials from them. I don't like buying fabric online because I can't feel the weight. I can't see the drape. Now, some certain classes of fabric always behave a certain way. If I get a batik, I know it's gonna move, you know, a certain way. If I get a jacquard, I mean, you know, there's different things that you know about fabric, but I like seeing it in person. So I want to go to a fabric trade show and I'll look at stuff, and then I'll get business cards, and then I order from them throughout the year.
Where do you purchase your mask making supplies?
There are several companies that I purchase mask making supplies from. Bitty Mold Supply, Black Lagoon Supply, Black Lagoon Supply, is it Black Lagoon Creature Supply? It's Black Lagoon Supply Company, I think is what it is. Bitty Mold Supply and Fright Props. Those three companies pretty much are going to have everything that you need. And who you order your 5-gallon bucket of latex from, I normally base on, for others, I base it on how far away are they and how much will shipping cost you. Because a 5-gallon bucket of latex weighs about 85 pounds, and it's not cheap to ship.
Where do you purchase accessories for your costumes?
Everywhere. It's from the dollar store to flea markets. I think that as a costumer, you are always on the lookout for accessories of some kind. I have drawers and drawers full of little gubbins and nernies that are going to end up on a costume sometime.
What's a good way to distress costumes that will hold up to repeated washings and actor abuse?
So it depends. There's a lot of different types and styles of distressing. One of the things that I do a lot is if I want like a gunky look, that's not something you want to apply every night, so I'll use clear silicone caulk, and I'll thin that with maybe naphtha or odorless mineral spirits. Thin that down. If you do that on a costume, you want to make sure that that costume is going to sit for a week or two while all of that naphtha or odorless mineral spirits just vapors off. So that way when the actor wears it, it doesn't smell like a chemical factory. But those thin down, and you can add different things to it. I avoid using food for any kind of distressing because storage and mice are actually a big problem. I used to use 15 bean soup mix in my vomit for costumes because it looked great. It looked wonderful as vomit. A little bit of amber and yellow colored paint mixed in with the silicone and the 15 bean soup mix. Perfect vomit. Mice loved it. And so then you would have just this, it looked like it was blistered because they would go in and eat the beans out of the vomit. Yeah. So that's a wet distressing. And that silicone mixture, if I'm doing a big rip or something, I'm going to paint that around the edges of that rip as a fray checker. But I can just do that clear as a fray check. So whatever you are, if you're ripping and shredding, you either want to sew along that edge in the same color fabric so that it doesn't run as much. I see that not done so often. Or paint it with some kind of a fray checker. I use the silicone mix because it's gross.
How long will your latex masks hold up with use in a haunt?
If you get 3 to 5 years out of a latex mask in a haunted house setting, you are in great shape. And that is 3 to 5 years with some maintenance. You're going to have to, at some point in time, glue a little bit of fur back down. Maybe put a little more hair on it. You know, you might have to, if the mask has resin teeth, you know, you might have to glue a tooth back in or make a new tooth with polyclay and throw it on there. You have to maintain your tools, and your mask in a haunted house setting is just one of your tools. So take care of them, and you should get 3 to 5 years before you encounter an actor so terrible that they just destroy everything. A haunted house actor, the average haunted house actor has the magical ability to tear up an iron anvil with a rubber mallet. I don't know how they do it, but they can. And anything you give them has to be as bulletproof as possible.
Moving into sewing, any tips for learning how to sew?
Just start. Don't be intimidated by the machine. And a $100 or $200 sewing machine may not be the best machine in the world, but you can make that function, and you can learn on that and decide if it's something that you want to, move forward with and do more. I like a Singer heavy-duty machine. That's the kind that I like. And if you stick with one type of sewing machine and you learn how to thread it, learning how to thread it, just thread it over and over and over again. That's the scariest part. There's so many different adjustments and things. YouTube is a wonderful resource. I didn't have that when I started learning how to sew, but go on YouTube and look up your machine, and any problem you're having, someone has a video on it to help you out, and that's just a wonderful thing. But get the sewing machine. Don't be intimidated by it, and practice, practice, practice. I still hate sewing curves. I would much rather sew something straight than sew something curved. And make some practice things. Make things that you don't care about before you have to make something that you do care about. Incorporate that style of crafting. Look at it as you're learning. Don't look at it as this is something that I have to do to get this project done. Do a bunch of little things in order to get that project closer to fruition outside of it.
And you answered your favorite sewing machines.
Oh, I did. Okay.
All right, so let's move into detailing. Tips for details that make a character pop without spending hours on small details that no one will notice.
Hats are overlooked quite a bit. That's because our society doesn't really value hats or use hats as much as we used to. So I think a hat, and you can have this great dark hat, but inside of that brim, attach a fabric that is a lighter color, because you may not want whatever makeup job you're doing to be completely lost in shadow. Kick that hat back a little bit and you have just put a spotlight on your face. I don't spend a ton of time doing details on the torso or on the actor's legs. I detail the hands, forearms. This is where the most detail is, and the face. Those areas are the ones that are moving forward towards the guest and interacting with the guest, and those are going to be the focus of the guests. It is nice and convenient. You can decorate a whole torso with a nice medallion, whatever this fabric is, and then put a nice medallion on it, and then that whole costume got richer. That whole costume got more ornate and elaborate. It's like when you clean your room. You don't have to clean your room, just make the bed. The room looks 80% cleaner just when you make the bed. That's all you have to do. So it is, a nice medallion is making the bed of costuming, simply because you've added a focal point. And if you can keep their eyes moving around the costume a little bit, by making some areas drab on purpose and then, highlighting the areas that you want, then they're not going to stop and look at any perceived lack of detail because you kept their eyes moving. I do a lot of stilt costumes, and frankly, you can get away with a lot more in stilt costumes simply because they're so big, and you just keep their eye moving around the costume, and all those little sins are forgiven because they're looking at that thing as a whole. Never forget that what you're working on is part of a whole. Your vest doesn't have to be beautiful and immaculate. The whole character has to be. So, and that's just a part of the whole. Don't forget that.
What should the difference be in detailing between a regular haunt character, a queue-line haunt character, and a front-facing marketing character?
Okay. inside the haunt and outside of the haunt. There doesn't have to be a difference in their costuming level. Because there is a factor that the costumer doesn't necessarily have control over. You're going to put your better actors outside. And a better actor is going to be able to act through more and overact their costume. Some big costumes will shut people down. And that's not who you're going to put outside. You need to put someone who can act through anything. You can put some actors in a cardboard box with a hole in it, just one hole in it, and they can entertain a queue line all night with all the crazy stuff that they think of. That is a spot where we have costumers say, okay, I am not the biggest flavor in this sauce. We have, the actor is going to do a lot of the flavor of that sauce. We have to give them a vehicle to do that in. So inside the house and outside the house, I think, can be the same level of costuming. Spend a little more time on this one, sure, because more photos will be taken of it. So think about that in terms of photos. Silhouette, again, has to be huge outside. Silhouette should be big inside anyway. And then media, where you're doing media and photos and pictures, that's where you pull out all the stops and you do all rich textures. I only use fabric with heavy texture because I need that to be seen. I don't want your eye to just bounce over something. I kind of want to drag your eye across something a little slower, just slow them down a little bit. Yeah, I mean, that's where you want textures. That's where we have bins of jewelry, and we just throw that jewelry on actors who are going to be outside. It's going to be in the media, not outside. And put rings on hands if you can, if it makes sense for the character, because that draws focus and makes them look at things. Find interesting bracelets, like I said, medallions, layers and layers and layers of texture. Layers is detail. All detail is achieved through layers. It is very hard to have one layer of something and call it detail. So it's just nice, because then you have too much of it and then it defeats the purpose. Lots of layers on your media characters, jewelry, accent those heavier, because you never know if it's going to be the whole picture in the character or in the image, or if it's just their hand. So make sure that everything on those media guys are accented.
And our last question, what makes the difference between a good costume versus a great costume?
Silhouette. I think a unique silhouette is going to be one of the #1 factors. Movement, having movement in the costume beyond what the actor can do. If you have nothing in this room is finished, okay, here, yeah. Then now these top hats are actually meant to go over masks, so they're ridiculously huge. But luckily, I have a ridiculously huge head. With this, I have changed my silhouette immensely, and I've also changed the movement, because when I move my head a little bit, I get a lot of movement up there. So this movement is bigger than this movement. And making a costume great sometimes is how much can it interact, how much can it affect. An actor with hands, walking at a group can maybe affect 3 people, but if you put wings, and then they come forward, then it's 8 people. So silhouette, movement, and I think uniqueness. If they have seen it a couple hundred times, there will never be a great Michael Myers costume, because it's Michael Myers, and Michael Myers is so well known. He is an old friend to your guests. He is not something that they have to be afraid of. They know who it is, you know. They know his cousin. They know his whole backstory. So that known character won't ever be a great costume. It will also always be compared to the original costume. So the best that you can achieve is looking like the original. Whereas if you have more of a generic werewolf or generic troll or, you know, some nice generic goblins, those can be great costumes and not remind the guest of anything. You know, it's possible. So silhouette, movement, originality. Have they seen it before?
So thanks for joining us, guys. We're going to drop our QR code into the somewhere in here is going to be the QR code. And thank you guys for stopping by. Really appreciate it, and we're excited to be a part of this year's Co-COVID.
Thank you.
So yeah, and we always close out our videos with a solid
Go make stuff.